Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. So, both of our 30th birthdays are approaching, and with that we've been doing a lot of thinking about how we've changed in our 20s. Unsurprisingly, both of us are pretty different now than we were 10 years ago, and a lot of those changes had to do with the way we look at life.
Now, it's worth mentioning that we all make mistakes, and the benefit of having 20/20 hindsight is that we can look back and think about how we would have done things differently with the knowledge that we have now. But at the same time, we probably wouldn't have the knowledge that we have now had we not made those mistakes, so we don't really regret anything. These are more just reflections on mistakes that we've made and trying to share the knowledge, but not really trying to vilify the experience.
On top of that, it doesn't really matter what your age is. It's never too early or too late to think about the things that we're going to talk about. It just so happened that we learned them in our 20s. And with that being said, let's get into it. So one of the big mistakes I made was not prioritizing taking breaks and taking time off, and even when I did, I would feel guilty about it and like I had to earn it by working hard enough first. What I mean by not taking breaks is both the kind of short breaks that happen on a daily basis, such as taking a 15-minute walk during my lunch break, to actual time off, as in vacation days. For a long time, I think it just never occurred to me that taking breaks would actually help with focus and productivity and just general stress. I think I just thought of it as if a thing needs to be done or an objective needs to be met, just work harder or work more until that thing is done or that objective is met, and until then, there isn't time to take a break. Now, when I put it like that, it obviously doesn't sound like a very healthy way of thinking, but it also wasn't something where I just woke up one day and was like, okay, I'm not going to prioritize taking breaks. It was more of a situation where I already had the tendency to view breaks as not that essential, and I think that's because growing up, if I wasn't getting high enough grades or test scores, the solution was to study more, and that did generally yield results. It then became progressively more extreme over time, like a slippery slope, especially after I started working. In retrospect, this was probably because the measure of what it means to do well is much more nebulous after you start working. Back in school, doing well was more easily defined because it could be measured by your grades or your GPA. However, it became much more open-ended after I started working, and as a result, I didn't know when to stop. What made it harder was the fact that my approach was, technically speaking, yielding results. And because of that, I made this mistake for the large majority of my career and my 20s. As you can probably guess, what my approach didn't yield was healthy, sustainable work habits and good mental health. Over time, due to a mix of starting to feel like I was burning out and becoming very negative as a person, and Lloyd also helpfully pointing out to me what I was doing, I started to recognize that my behavior essentially stemmed from the fact that I had a hard time seeing my own needs as something important. Again, it wasn't a situation where I just woke up one day and decided that they weren't important. It was more like I was just unintentionally and repeatedly treating them as not important through my actions. Breaks and time off would always be the first to fall to the wayside whenever something came up. Of course, situations do sometimes arise where you don't have a choice and you can't take the break, but the problem was I was characterizing all situations like that when that just wasn't the case. By doing this, I was always indirectly demonstrating to myself that my own needs came second. Working on this issue definitely took time, as with all the issues we talk about in this video. For me, I think awareness of my own behavior was actually key because I found that part much harder to do than actually taking action to take breaks once I realized what I was doing.
So for the majority of my life, I really leaned into this idea of being a perfectionist. I kind of wore that as a badge of honor, as some people do. I mean, while there's a negative connotation associated with being a perfectionist, surely it's not a bad thing for someone or something to be perfect, right? The reality is, it can often be to our detriment to overly focus on things being perfect. For example, when I was still in university, I was so laser focused on the idea of making my study notes really perfect that I focused too much on minor details, formatting, or just wanting to have an idea of how the notes look before I really even got any content down. I would spend a huge amount of time doing this when the real focus of the exercise should have just been trying to get as much content down as I could on my notes, which would have helped me with my studying a lot more. This honestly led me to feeling a lot of discouragement and resistance to things that I knew I needed to do. Things always felt more difficult than they had to be, and because the time it took me to do things was so inflated, I found it really difficult to get myself motivated to start. I ended up eventually getting over this issue by realizing that my obsession with perfection was causing me to not really be as productive as I wanted to be and not really getting as many things done. On top of that, I personally don't find it enjoyable at all when I'm dreading getting started with work or just generally feeling a lot of resistance. So I realized I needed to change my perspective or I'd constantly be feeling negative about the work that I needed to do. I realized that I had to be satisfied enough with my work that I was proud of it, but not have it be perfect because, to be honest, that's not really even possible anyway. This applies to a lot of things in school, but also applies very much to what Em and I are doing making YouTube videos. There's a huge desire as a perfectionist and as a creator to make sure that every single video we put out is on par with some of our favorite channels out there that have hundreds of thousands or even millions of subscribers. But we realize to get there, we need to keep putting the practice in, and that means the important thing is to just keep showing up, doing the work, and releasing videos that are good enough, but not necessarily perfect. We honestly cringe a little looking at some of our really early videos, and even now, we're only about 20 videos in. But we understand to get where we are now, and in fact to keep improving, we need to just keep putting out videos and practicing and trying to get better at what we're doing each and every time, because it's never going to be perfect. You may have heard the quote, "Good is the enemy of great," and that's something that we certainly live by ourselves. But another great quote is, "Perfect is the enemy of good." Sometimes focusing too much on making things perfect means that we don't really end up getting much done at all, so there's a very healthy balance to be found between an emphasis on quality and an emphasis on just getting things done in the first place.
So, another mistake I made was taking things too personally. Whether it was the behavior of other people or the things they would say, I was always quick to assume that it was because of me or something I did. This includes stuff that's a bit more obvious, like criticism, but also even included passing remarks made by people or even changes in moods or facial expressions. For instance, if I got negative feedback on some work I did, I tended to interpret that not only as, okay, this aspect of my work needs to be improved, but I would also make it an interpretation of myself, like, oh, I'm so dumb, or why am I so crap at this? Or if someone's mood didn't seem to be very good during an interaction I had with them, I would jump to thinking, oh, did I say something wrong or do something wrong? Instead of thinking, okay, there's a lot of reasons why that might be the case, so there's no need to worry about it unless it's directed at me. I wasn't even really aware that I was doing this until probably my mid-20s after I started working as a lawyer. It was then that I began to realize how much stuff that people have going on in their lives, whether work or personal, and you never really know what's going on behind the scenes of someone's life or in their mind. As a result, it's most likely that their actions or their behavior or their mood or whatever aren't about you at all. The partner sounding a bit shorter in their emails to you today, they used to make me super anxious and freaked out until I realized it's probably not about me. Maybe they're stressed because a client is chasing them for something, or they're not feeling well, or maybe they had an argument with their family that morning. The point is, once I realized how many variables there were and how unlikely it is that whatever is going on is about me, it made it a lot easier to not really mind and just keep doing my own thing. What it really boils down to is just remembering and understanding that a lot of the times what people do or say are just really a reflection of themselves and where they're at, and not about me. And when I did that, it became a lot easier to not take things so personally because my point of view wasn't so self-oriented. Now, it's worth pointing out that part of this issue was my own negative self-talk due to the fact that I was, and still am to a lesser degree, very hard on myself. Because of that, I was always very quick to jump to the conclusion that I was the one doing something wrong. The problem here wasn't that I necessarily actually believed some of these things I said to myself. For instance, I don't actually think that I'm dumb. The problem was I got into the habit of speaking like that to myself and then not catching myself doing that. So while I'm still working on not defaulting to talking negatively to myself, I catch myself much more often when I do now. Which means I also catch myself when I start jumping to the conclusion that what someone did or said is because of something that I've done.
This is one that was probably one of the greatest struggles for me, but I definitely think I put way too much emphasis growing up on what people thought about me. I feel like this is definitely something that everyone's experienced to some degree in their lifetime, but I feel like it was something that was very amplified for me for a very good portion of my life, given that I was very social, extroverted, and just ran in a lot of circles. I'm a person with a lot of different interests. In high school alone, I was a huge band geek, I played sports, and I really enjoyed watching anime and playing video games. Because I had different groups of friends that I wanted to fit in with, I kind of was afraid to show my full self to some of those friends because I knew that we had some established common ground, and I was afraid they'd judge me for the other interests I had. For example, when I started to get into sports and athletics, I kind of felt a bit shy to talk about video games or anime or even the fact that I was really into band because I thought that I wouldn't be accepted for those things. I think a good portion of this comes from the fact that I was never really very popular as a kid, and I always kind of struggled with the idea of acceptance. I always wanted to be agreeable and show people sides of me that I thought they would like because I thought that was the winning strategy to try and make friends. While this may be outdated now, people have evolved to form clans, groups, and societies because there's strength in numbers from an evolutionary perspective. Those who played well with others tended to survive, and definitely being accepted into a group or society involves some level of people liking you and accepting you. This is still relevant to some degree today, but is largely outdated. While there's definitely some social need to have positive interactions with others, and it definitely feels great to be accepted by our peers, we're not really fighting tooth and nail out here for survival, for the most part. And over time, I kind of learned that trying to guess what people would think of me and my interests was kind of pointless. Not only was I kind of wrong about my assumptions a lot of the time, but it kind of just took up way too much of my mental power thinking about this. Mark Manson addresses this in his book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F***, where he talks about emphasizing your personal values and not really giving a f*** about things that don't really align with those values. Blindly pursuing something, such as the desire to be liked by people, only reinforces the idea that you lack that thing in the first place. And to be honest, everyone is different. It's not possible for everyone to vibe with me or anyone else. And since focusing more on being myself and doubling down on the things that really matter to me, I found that I've been lucky enough to be surrounded by a great group of friends that share the same or similar values to myself. And I don't ever really worry anymore about people not wanting to be my friend or not really accepting me for me. Thanks a lot for checking out our video, guys. If you'd like to see more, click here for a video on how we use a growth mindset to overcome failures, and click on this video for a video that the YouTube algorithm thinks that you'll like.